New York City and state police are investigating a string of recent attacks at 4 synagogues in the Bronx as possible hate crimes. Despite no arrest yet, Mayor Bill de Blasio says that police have a solid lead, and they released video of a suspect throwing rocks and even kicking in glass at one of the Jewish temples. Luckily, no one was hurt, but the community is shaken. And this comes as a new report from the Anti-Defamation League shows hate incidents against Jewish Americans remains high. But last year saw a 4% decrease amid the pandemic compared to a record-breaking level in 2019. So to discuss this, I want to bring in Oren Segal. He is the vice president of the Center on Extremism for the Anti-Defamation League, an organization, of course, focused on rooting out anti-Semitism and hate overall, online and in person. Oren, thank you so much for joining us. So I suppose it would be reasonable that we would see a 4% dip in this sort of behavior last year because, you know, people are under lockdown, they're not moving around as much. So I don't even know if you can even like sort of factor in that decrease during the pandemic. So I got to ask you, what continues to drive this surge in attacks?
Yeah, so despite the fact that there was a 4% decrease, there was actually a 10% increase in harassment. And 2020 remains the third highest year of anti-Semitic incidents that we've documented since we've been doing this in 1979. And so one of the reasons why a 4% decrease happened during a time of a pandemic is that some people stayed home. However, anti-Semites and those who purvey anti-Semitism will always find different ways to try to promote and spread their hatred. So Zoom bombing became a term of art, if you will, throughout 2020, where Jewish students, Shabbat services were disrupted by anti-Semitism through the communication tool that we were all relying on during the pandemic.
That completely makes sense. It's sort of like water or other forces of nature. They just sort of divert into whatever's the easiest path. What else stood out to you? And I want to sort of reinforce this point too, that this is the stuff that you guys are able to track, right? This is the stuff that rises to the level of your observation. There are all sorts of incidents that happen that we never hear about, you never hear about. So when you talk about a 10% increase, it's really just a fraction of what's happening out there. But what else stood out to you about this report?
Yeah, so not surprisingly, the states with the highest reported anti-Semitic incidents were New York, New Jersey, California, Pennsylvania, and Florida. And in part, that's because they have large populations and also large Jewish populations. I think the good news is that we didn't see the type of mass casualty attack targeting the Jewish community that we have seen in previous years, you know, in Jersey City, in Pittsburgh, and today actually marks the second anniversary of an attack at a Chabad house in San Diego. The other thing that stood out is 16% of the anti-Semitic incidents that we documented were done by extremists. Right, those who are putting white supremacist flyers with anti-Semitic narratives on institutions. But that means that the majority of the anti-Semitic incidents in our audit year after year are carried out by average Joes and average Janes, right? People who are not necessarily extremists. And that speaks to the way anti-Semitism has been normalized and infected people of different backgrounds.
Great point. Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas says that he is launching an investigation into domestic violent extremism within his own department. This follows a similar order taking place within the Department of Defense. It also comes amid the probe into the assault on the Capitol, where we know that some of the rioters were current and former members of law enforcement and the military. This feels significant to me. I don't recall something like this happening before, but you would know better than me. Is this significant, these internal reviews?
Internal reviews of extremism within the ranks of institutions that are supposed to protect all Americans are critical. Now, that doesn't mean that there are massive amounts of extremists in all these institutions, but frankly, we don't have a luxury to ignore even a few. And so when people are willing to do reviews of their own practices, their own policies, finding ways to make sure that they're rooting out extremism and hate within their ranks, that is a positive step forward.
Now, I want to go back to what you said before about, who's responsible for this. And yes, there is a portion that is coming from a sort of well-organized extremist group of philosophy, people who are part of an organization. But a whole lot of this behavior is coming, as you put it, from average Joes and average Janes or Jills or whatever it is. And so then I want to ask you what we can do. What responsibility do individuals, law enforcement, elected officials have when it comes to mitigating this behavior, stopping this behavior, making it less comfortable for people to act in this manner?
Yeah, I think fundamentally we all have to realize we all have a stake in pushing back against anti-Semitism. ADL's mission as an anti-hate organization recognizes that in order to fight anti-Semitism, you have to fight other forms of bigotry and hatred. And in order to fight racism, Islamophobia, misogyny, and other forms of hatred, you fight anti-Semitism. So allyship is one important way that people can step up. The second is reporting. This data that we collect is critical in terms of resourcing to the threat. People need to know what is happening in their communities. People need to know the numbers in order to be able to create strategies on how to mitigate that. And then perhaps third, it's not unreasonable for users of social media platforms where so much of this hatred is incubated, to expect that these platforms do more to stop the exploitation of their services and platforms. That's where extremism, anti-Semitism, and other forms of hate get normalized. And we all have a stake in pushing back against that as well.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad that you also brought up other forms of hate, because the work that you do has an impact on the expressions of hate that we see against other groups. We know we've been talking a lot about hate against Asians, and frankly, your organization has kind of been on the ground working to stop all sorts of hate for a very long time, and we really appreciate it. Oren Segal, thank you very much.
Thanks.